Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Hannah, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah. Well, we met when the world before it changed and went upside down at a real event, live and in person in Atlanta, which was funny because it was a bit of a precursor because we were live and there was a small studio audience, but it went out mostly to an online audience, which somehow feels like the future.
So true. I didn't even think of that.
No, I just thought of it right now. Like just right now, I'm like, oh yeah, that was the future, except it was in 2019.
It's kind of prophetic.
But it wasn't there like 20 of us in the audience and thousands of people watching online?
Yep. It was a really small, like in-person audience. And it felt like, I don't know if you felt this, but it's a little bit like awkward when it's such a small group and you know that it's live at the same time. Like, so it's like, you're like, who am I engaging with?
Because basically the audience was those of us who were speaking at the event and like a handful of invited guests, right?
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great people, a lot of whom I still keep in contact with via social today, but young adults and yeah, who knew that was a precursor of the future? But anyway.
Yeah.
Speaking of live events, TED,
yeah.
Your TED Talk has 3 million views, which is astounding. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you were 24 when you gave it, which is even more outstanding. Really.
Thank you.
What was it? Like, take us up to how you got that TED event. And then I really want to talk about the public speaking phenomenon. There I am. I can't even say public speaking, but the whole idea of like what TED taught you about communication, even at such a young age.
Yeah. So I had watched a handful of TED Talks and I had done no speaking whatsoever. So came right out the gate with TED. But I remember a friend said to me, she was like, you have such a great story. Like you should share it. Like you should do a TEDx. So I went onto their website. There weren't any TEDx's like happening locally where I was for that time frame. And I noticed that like the front homepage banner had a global talent search that they were doing. They've only ever done this twice. And they were looking for untold stories. And so I was like, oh no, I think my story's untold. I'm not really sure. But like I got on my iPhone.
You've never spoken in public before, probably, right?
Yeah. I had never done anything. And I don't like to be on stage. I have horrendous stage fright.
Wow.
And so it's just ironic. The whole thing is ironic, but I recorded it on my iPhone. I told them a little bit of my story. I sent it in to them. And 2 months later, I got an email that was like, you are a finalist for the United States. You need to come to New York City on this particular date to deliver your audition. And so the first day you show up and you deliver your talk in front of all the people that are working in the TED offices. Like you're in the TED offices and they're critiquing you. So
and you've never spoken in public before.
And I was like fumbling all over my words. I was so nervous and they had me rewrite half of the talk. I only had about 12 hours to do it, but I had to rewrite the whole entire thing. And then the next night was the actual live audition in front of about 300 past TED speakers who all had to rate us. Like,
oh my gosh, this is your debut at 24. Yep. That's hard enough at 42, but at 24, man.
Oh, and I think everybody probably thought like, oh gosh, this is going to be a train wreck because like my one practice round did not go well. And I got up there, this strange, weird piece met me. I delivered the talk because mine was completely memorized. There was like a cadence and a rhythm to it. And I remember I got off the stage and everybody was crying and I was crying. But yeah, the talk that's online on TED.com, that's like my audition. That was never supposed to see the light of day. And they liked it so much that they put it online. And no one ever contacted me to tell me like, hey, your life is about to flip upside down. So like, I'm just getting random phone calls from my friends being like, Hannah, you're on TED.com. Like, you are TED Talk of the day. And I thought it was a joke, but the content manager was like, no, it's not a joke. And from that point forward, I started speaking all over the place with no speaking experience at all.
That's insane. So okay, because I watched the TED Talk. It's super short. It's what is it?
Yep, 4 minutes.
I was going to say 5 minutes. So it's 4 minutes. And that was your rehearsal.
That's my rehearsal. Yeah.
Get out. Okay. Wow. Because, okay, so let's talk about the rewriting process and what you've learned. So that was in 2012. Did I get the date right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's like 9 years ago almost now by the time this hits the air, which is crazy. So you've had a couple of laps around the sun since then. But I could tell, like even in the rehearsal, it was a classic TED intro. You didn't like, oh, it's such an honor to be here. It was just, you just started, right?
They made me do that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What did they teach you when, and I imagine in those days, like, was Chris Anderson there? Like,
he was sitting, front row.
You're kidding. So you got Chris Anderson, the founder of TED, like critiquing
me. And he was the one that kind of, I think he could tell that I was really, really nervous. And that, I mean, I'm surrounded by like scientists and botanists and Nobel Prize winning, and I'm just this girl with a mail crate. And he started talking to me and kind of maybe getting to the root of like, okay, like let's push past some of like this prose and like, let's just have a conversation here. And I said something about my mother, which ends up being the introduction to the talk. But he was like, that right there. I want you to start with your mom. I want you to tell us about your mom. I want you to go in right there. And it changed the whole direction of the talk. But like, they are very intense there in a great way because they call you up to excellence. But it's also like, yeah, rewrite half of it and come back tomorrow and be ready to go. And like you had, they actually had said in the audition process, tell us if you need to do this talk in 4 minutes, 5 minutes, or 6 minutes. The lower you say, like the lower the amount of time you say you need, there's a better chance it will pick you. So I said 4 minutes and they were like, great, come on in. And so they were very strict on time standards. I don't think there's ever been a talk that's been more stressful than that one in all the talks I've given since.
Okay, so what have you learned? Because there are books and like whole seminars on how TED structures talks and the whole deal, but you conveyed an awful lot. Like it was a powerful story and very memorable in 4 minutes. And you got thousands of communicators listening to this episode, okay? And most of us are like, I'm not even like introed 4 minutes into it. What are some of the principles of TED Talks that you learned then and perhaps then that you carry through to today?
I think one of the biggest things that I learned was that like TED was not interested in me being relatable. That was not the thing. I did not need to try to say something that was going to strike a chord with the person in the audience. I needed to get out there and I needed to share my story and trust that the story itself was going to hit people how it needed to hit people. And what's really interesting is I freelance, right, for a company known as Meditative Story. I don't know if you've ever listened to their podcast.
I have not, no.
The guy that asked me to come on board and write some stories with them, he remembered me from his TED days of working at TED. So they do the same thing in this process of like, you don't have to worry, like trying to find those points of relatability. Share your story and make it your own and make it unique. And just trust that like the audience is going to track with you and they're going to feel their own emotions, whatever that roller coaster is supposed to look like. I think they also taught me too, though, that you don't need to fill it up with a lot of words. It's a very short talk, but it gets the point across. And like, I think that conciseness and not wasting people's time and getting right to the heart of what needs to be said, I've carried that with me ever since.
Really? So what would a typical introduction, because you are a public speaker, and we'll talk about the future of public speaking maybe at some point, right? With COVID changing everything. But like, what would a typical introduction for you now, 9 years later, look like when you're giving a public talk?
It would still look the same. Start with a story. And if it makes you nervous to get up there and be like, hi, I'm so-and-so. And for me, I don't even like to get into credentials. I like to start where I'm comfortable. And that's with storytelling. That's the thing I've always been comfortable with. And something I learned in the back end of it, because TED did have us write the talk, send it in. They sent back comments before we even ever saw them in person. That's something that I've carried with me ever since. Every one of my talks is written out completely before I ever deliver it.
And then you memorize it, or you bullet point it, or how do you handle that?
Yep. A lot of times I don't have to memorize it. Thank God. I've had to deliver that TED Talk over again in some certain audiences. And it's stressful all over again. But I do speak the stories out loud. I become familiar with them. I find the humor in them. And I, in a way, memorize those stories. Like I could tell you like, okay, I know that this story takes 6 minutes to tell. I know that story takes 7 minutes to tell. And so there is that repetition to like learning a story of yours in and out. But for me, it all starts with writing.
So Hannah, I don't want to put you on the spot, but because it was 9 years ago, but you've given it since then. You've become famous for it. Can you just give us the first 30 seconds of that talk? Like just so we can illustrate it just for people, or a sample of how you would start a talk today. Because you're right. So many, as a public speaker, so often, and I don't want to put you on the spot. We can edit this out if it doesn't work out. But so often as a speaker, I'll get up there. It's like, oh, it's so good to be in Seattle, and I haven't been to Seattle. And last time I was, and I know that's not a good technique, but I do it anyway. So how do you start?
Well, and I do think there have been talks where I have done just that, because there is a relatability factor to that, Okay. So it's like, if I'm going somewhere and, where was I? I think it was Wisconsin. That's where all the cheese is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I had my Uber driver take me to like the cheese castle and all of that. And like, if a story comes out of that, I will always share that. But like, gosh, can I remember the beginning of the talk?
I don't want to put you on the spot.
I was one of the only kids in college.
Go ahead.
I'm going to do what I can. Okay.
Okay. Do what you can. This is fun.
I was one of the only kids in college who had a reason to go to the mailbox at the end of the day. And that's mainly because my mother has never believed in Facebook, in texting, in email in general. And so while all the other kids were BBMing their parents, I was literally waiting by the mailbox to get some sort of news from home, which was a little frustrating when grandma was in the hospital. But still, I was just waiting on some unkempt cursive from my mother. I did it.
Oh, you did it. That's brilliant. And I watched the talk. That sounds exactly like your talk. Good for you. Good for you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. So what is it? And that's what I wanted people to hear. Like you just started. And I feel like dissect that from a public speaking standpoint. Why is that an effective introduction?
Because you are the one that knows your stories the best. And because people relate to stories. I've never gone wrong as long as I was sharing a story from my heart. And I remember like I did that talk, and then it was like colleges were asking me to come and speak all over the place. And I'm sure, college students, they're hard to get
They're
to.
not polite. They're like, you are boring, right?
And if like it's extra credit or something and they have to be there, it's even worse. And so for my own self, I found like when I got up there and I tried to make some weird, awkward introduction to make myself feel better, it only made me feel more nervous as when I just got up there and I immediately began, and they were just kind of thrust into it with me. One of the things that was really interesting was a few years ago, I spoke with Christine Kane's Propel, and they did the same thing. They said, you have 20 minutes. We want the talk completely written out. No surprises, nothing. And I sent them the talk, and I included an introduction that talked about how nervous I was about this, because I used to go off of that crutch that if I could just tell people that I was nervous, then it was okay if I messed up, right? They were with me. And I remember her coming back and she didn't have any feedback except that she wanted me to get rid of that part, that she did not want me to walk on stage and lead with my insecurity, but trust that it was going to be enough to leave that out. And that has stuck with me ever since, of like, wow, like so often I just want to lead with an insecurity because I'm afraid maybe I don't add up.
That'll preach. Okay, right there. Worth the price of admission. Do not lead with your insecurity. I think.
Because do you hear me?
That's what we do.
Like, I have a lisp. There is no reason I should public speak, but I'm here.
No, you're right. You know, a lot of that is you want to get the crowd to like you. You want to crack a few jokes. You want to, find some common bond. What is that? If you really unpack it in free counseling, that's probably insecurity.
Insecurity, exactly. Mm-hmm. And that's where it's like, okay, well, I'm here to share my story anyway. And I think sometimes you can definitely get exasperated with yourself because you've shared the story so many times. But you have to remember that, like, this audience is a new audience and they've never heard it before. And I don't know, I have to see the power in those stories that I'm bringing to share.
No, and you think about it, 3 million views on your TED Talk, which also means that something like 7 billion people haven't seen the TED Talk, right? Because you think, oh my gosh, everybody knows this. Like that was the most watched talk I've ever done or whatever. The reality is most people haven't. So that's good to know. Yeah. Anything else you learned from Chris Anderson or the folks at TED that you think is worth sharing with leaders? Because you do have a lot of people who communicate listening to the show.
Gosh, I just think, I've stayed in touch with them throughout the years, and that company, it's like there's such a standard of excellence that I look up to. And I think, like, what an honor that was the first thing I was ever exposed to, because it kept me believing, like, no matter where you are, if you are in a room full of past TED speakers, or if you are, in a basement of a college and there's 6 people, you still show up and deliver that talk to, like, the best of your ability, as if there was like a packed stadium of people, right? Like, if you can communicate something powerful to just one person, that might change their whole entire life. And that's enough. Because I think as speakers, like, sometimes when you show up and there's not as many people as you thought there was going to be, like, you immediately start to think, okay, is it worth it that I'm here? Like, why am I even here? I've had those thoughts before. Mm-hmm. And then there's always someone that comes out of the woodworks and is like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, like, tell you this story. And you're like blown away because you're like, I came here for you. Like, I came to Kansas City for you specifically. And so don't ever belittle those moments where you feel like there should be more, but it's a small group, because, like, that small group matters. Just one person matters.
Yeah, that is a good word. And I also think, having started with a very tiny audience years ago, if you're not faithful with the 5 people you got, you're probably not going to be faithful with the 5,000 you might have one day, or 500 or 50 or Amen. Whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
So take us through what led up to the TED Talk, because it's not just a story you tell on stage. It was a period of your life that somehow involved letters. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah. So I graduated from college and I moved to New York City for what I thought was going to be a dream job. I'm very passionate about human rights. So while other people grew up with, like, NSYNC posters on their walls, I had cutouts from the UN catalog on my walls. Like, that was me. And so I landed this job being a liaison for an NGO at the United Nations out of college, which I don't know why they gave that to a college graduate, but hey, I'm forever grateful. And I found myself very quickly struggling with a lot of, like, loneliness that ended up morphing into a diagnosis for depression. I didn't know it at the time because 10 years ago, we didn't talk about depression as much as we do right now. And also because, like, my family didn't talk about it. I didn't know that it was, like, in my family, and that it wasn't actually that surprising if I was dealing with depression. And so as a way to cope with my sadness, I started to write letters to strangers I would see in New York City, and I would rip out the letters and I'd fold them up and I would leave them unsigned all over the city, just in the hopes that somebody would find one and like feel like it wasn't an accident that they were seen on that day. And I had this little baby blog at the time. I love blogging. And I think it was you were so passionate about blogging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have done a lot of blogging. Yeah.
Yeah, but like you talked about it in the speaking engagement, just about like the importance of that. And it gave me a renewed fire to be like, I'm going back to that blog. And like, at that time, there was maybe like 100 readers of mine from like college and my mom. And I blogged about the fact that I was writing these letters. And I said, if you need a letter for whatever reason, I'll write to you. And I thought I'd get a few responses, but I ended up writing over 400 letters to strangers over the next 9 months.
Wow.
And it sounds great. It was not that fun, but I knew, especially this was the height of the labeling of millennials, and the labels were never favorable for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking to myself, if I want to be anything in this lifetime, I want to be consistent. I want to be somebody who follows through on a promise, because no one believes that my generation has that in us. And so I wrote all of those letters as a way of saying, I'm going to finish what I started. But at the end of that, everybody was like, oh no, it's not over. Like you need to give this to other people. And so I built a love letter writing organization. I had no idea what I was doing because it had never existed before, but I just knew that like these letters had given me something at a time where I was really lonely, and I wanted to give that to other people. And so that's the organization that I run today. That is like forever been my passion project. And people go online, they nominate friends and family going through something tough. We put up stories every month, and people around the world handwrite a letter and mail it in. And those people are blessed with bundles of 300 to 600 to 1,200 letters showing up on a day where they think they're not going to be seen.
Wow. And those are like handwritten letters on paper.
All handwritten. Yes. Yep.
I'd love to drill down on that a little bit. It's a really inspiring story. So one of the stories is you overcame your loneliness by reaching out to other lonely people. There's something there. But the interplay, because this is a very live issue now in 2021, as this goes live, between analog and digital, right? So we spent the last year pretty much digital cocoon, and people are saying people want live relationship and everything. And yet your generation was really, you would be almost at the age where you're the first digital native, right? Like if you think about it, you probably got your cell phone when you were in middle school-ish.
Yep.
Or young high school. Is that right? And would have been among the first, because for people older than you, it probably would have been high school, or, you know, for me, it happened in adulthood because there were no phones that you could have when I was your age, right? So there was all that. But what is the interplay in your mind for your generation or those coming behind you between the digital and the analog?
Gosh, I wish that there was more of the analog. And I'm not saying that because I think we need to go back to a time that is not as efficient as what we have right here. Technology is a huge gift. Like I think what I do today, it would not exist without social media. And so I always wanted to harness that power in order to bring people back to a more present moment. Because the thing is, my generation, like, we struggle with being present. We're always on our phones. We're always distracted. We wonder why we're so anxious and depressed. Is because we grew up with these phones being such an essential part of our, I don't want to say DNA, but in a lot of ways, like it became not just like call mom on this phone, but like, this is where you filter all your thoughts and your feelings. And this is how the world rates you. And I was in college right before I moved to New York City, and I wanted to do my undergraduate research on the negative effects of social media. But it was 2009, and there was no research out there on it. And I just remember thinking to myself, man, like this is powerful, but like this is gonna be a mess in a few years. I just felt it in
You
my
saw
spirit.
that. That's funny.
I saw
I remember
it, and
2009. I did not see it. You knew it. Wow.
I remember there was only one professor that had written a book, and I interviewed him, and it was called The Dumbest Generation. And it was on the negative impacts of technology, but there was nothing out there. And I remember people saying to me, oh, that's like wet paint. We're not going to know for 10 or 15 or 20 years the negative impacts of what social media is going to do for a generation growing up with it. Well, we're 10 years in, right?
Mhm.
And More Love Letters was built on this premise that it's not about letters. It's not about stationery or stamps. It's about presence. It's about real connection. It's about you being willing to put your phone down and think about somebody for a few minutes, not even a lot of time, but like to focus in on that task and that person because they are worthy to be seen in that way. And I just have always wanted people to know that because like, I'm not even like, it's so funny to be like this postal service maven when I don't even really care so much about letter writing, so much as I care of like, going back to my mom. My mom wrote me letters and she tucked them all over for me to find. And there's going to be a day one day where my mom isn't here anymore and I'm going to have her letters. And I write letters now for my 8-month-old daughter, not because I think it's the efficient way of communication, but because I want her to have something to hold of me. And I think my generation doesn't have that. We don't get that. And we also don't take enough time to even build that if we wanted to.
It's a really interesting discussion here because, when I look at your company, I look at you're a speaker, you're an author, you've written a book, but you're also, you run a virtual company, right? Do you have a headquarters or do you run it out of your house like a lot of us do?
Yep, running out of my house.
That's right. You appear to be in a spare room, right? That you've outfitted to your office.
That has, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's this weird hybrid, right? Because I talk to a lot of leaders, like when it comes back to a church service or that kind of thing, and they're like, no, everyone wants in person. And they make the argument that your generation doesn't want digital, that they only want in person. And yet I wonder, there is an in person for sure, but you're never not going to be technological. Do you want to speak into that? And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm trying to get my own head around it, Hannah.
Yeah, I think it's something we're all trying to figure out, right? What this is, because I do think, especially like in these times right now, like everybody is craving in person. But at the same time, I think it's so much easier to not show up at all. And that like, I've seen my generation, I've worked in college ministry and they come the first time and they come the second time and then they don't want to show up anymore, right? Because it's not shiny and it's not new anymore. And so I think that there is this need for us to have this value of consistency of like, okay, yeah, we go there every Sunday. Okay, yeah, I go to the gym every day. This isn't like a 30-day program or a 6-week program, but like our culture has almost been packaged and given to us in that way of like, oh, like you want to study your Bible, here's a 21-day program. But like, what about day 22, And so I've definitely found within our company, because at the time that I was launching it, I was working at a global nonprofit on their communications team. And we had a term called slacktivism, where millennials just wanted everything to be very easy. Like they just want to click a button and believe that they're doing good in the world. And I remember being so enraged by this because I was like, I don't think that that's true about us, And so I remember being so astounded and still so astounded that in order to participate in our mission, you have to go and get stamps from the post office. You have to write letters. You need stationery. And that never deters anybody from getting involved. They're actually really excited to do something apart from the screen. And so I think that there's kind of like, we're in like this middle chasm of like, we do want in-person things and we're tired and we're run down by these devices. But at the same time, our whole lives run from these devices. And we've also kind of in a weird way, like been taught that this is how you're significant in the world, is if you're showing up on these platforms. I don't believe that, but I know that there are so many people that will engage me in conversations and immediately be like, oh, you have this many followers on Instagram, or you have a blue check on Twitter. And that is the thing that they're aspiring towards.
No, it's the funniest thing. I mean, we have family friends, and I've known these kids. They're now teenagers, but I've known them since they were born because they've been really good friends with, we're really good friends with their parents. And I have a blue check mark on Instagram. And all of a sudden, overnight, I went to becoming a celebrity. And it's like, no, I've actually been at your house, like when you guys were in kindergarten. Like, you've known me this whole time. I haven't changed at all.
Yeah.
But it is a category in their mind that when it gets clicked, it's like, I don't know, that it is really weird. What would you say to those who are trying to bridge this world, I call it the slipstream between analog and digital? Like, here we are having this conversation, but I'm going to finish this up and then I'll go see my wife who's upstairs and we'll cook dinner in real life in the kitchen and, all that thing. But then I'm going to look at my phone and there's a text from a buddy in Vancouver or Atlanta, and I respond to him. I wonder if we try to make it binary too much, where, our church is going to be all online, or our company's going to be all online, or it's going to be all takeout, or it's going to be all in person because that's what people want. Any thoughts on that moving into the future? I don't even know that that's a good question.
No. I hopefully I can answer what I at least have learned in my own life, is that you have to find the balance in everything, right? What you just explained there, that was a balance of yes, I'm going to use the tools that I've been given, but also I live a very real life. And I would encourage people, especially young people, of hey, it's not all happening on the screen, but also it is necessary to do this work if your work requires this of you, right? And so having that balance of okay, well, I have an 8-month-old daughter downstairs, and it's she's gonna know if I can't pay attention to her and I have to be on my screen all the time, she's gonna pick up on that. And so it's we have this first generation coming up that is they've seen their parents with their phones, and they've seen the importance of phones because of that. And so I think for me, it comes down to in personal life, having those boundaries, knowing when you're turned on, knowing when you're shut off, and then living by those boundaries. But I think for businesses and communicators, every audience is different. And so you kind of have to gauge off of what it is that they want. There are some places where it's yeah, we want to go and we want to sit in that restaurant in person, because that is the experience. They've crafted an experience. And a lot of church services are like that as well. And so I think, I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Yeah, it does. And how, let me ask it in a slightly different way, and then we can move on because there's a lot I want to cover today. But how do we show up for you? When you're saying, I will get this on my phone, and you can pick church, you can pick a business, whatever you want. I'm happy to order Starbucks on my phone and just do the mobile pickup, or I'll get Uber Eats to drop off dinner tonight. That's fine. I don't need a connection with you, or I'm happy to watch the message online. But where do you, and I'm going to make this idiosyncratic to you, where do you want to show up in real life? Where do you no, this is what I want a connection with personally rather than digitally?
I mean, in a pre-COVID world,
let's assume no COVID and we don't have to wear masks. So the vaccine is on its way and blah, 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 blah. But let's assume moving forward.
Yeah, I think that I would always opt for the in-person experience over the online experience if I have that ability, because I think about my people and my friends, the girlfriends that we all watch The Bachelorette together on Monday nights. And it's well, we've tried to do that over Zoom and it doesn't really work, Yeah. And so it's I want to show up for them. I want them to know that if one of them is going through a crisis, I'm going to show up at your front door. I'm going to be there for you. I do prefer a church experience that is in person, because I think that I've learned over the last however many months, it's really like hard to worship in my living room. And there are elements of it that just like, there's something about being in person with other people and being in a room with other people. But at the same time, I think because we're in this world right now where we don't have that luxury of being in person, that's not an invitation to just shut off completely, you know?
Right.
Like, it's not an invitation to just never text my friends and check in on them. Or, you know, I like to send like Venmos to people for coffee, you know, as a way to say like, hey, I see you. And like, we can't have an in-person coffee date right now, but like, you know, and I try to do the same thing for my audience. Like if I can show up in real life for them, I'm going to do that. I send voice memos all the time in DMs. There was a time in my single life where I would show up at people's baby showers and like wedding showers, and like every city I was speaking in, I would put out an invitation to meet me at a diner and come get pancakes with me. And to this day, those are still some of the sweetest memories that I have of getting to actually meet my readers and talk to them and have face-to-face conversation, because there's something there when you can get somebody face-to-face and it's unfiltered and it's unedited. And if anything, you show up in all these places just to have those conversations.
You know, it's interesting. That is what I am missing most from the road. It's not the travel. It's not the airports. It's meeting listeners. It's meeting leaders, those one-on-one connections, even a stolen lunch where you kind of sneak off on a break and have a conversation on the lawn or that kind of thing. But here's a dilemma, right? The number of people that you reach online is what, 10x, 100x, 1000x, what you meet in real life. It's that strange dilemma. Okay. How much is loneliness and isolation a factor for your generation? Not that you're speaking exclusively for your generation, but that's kind of how your story started out, right?
Oh, yeah. I think it's a huge factor. I mean, I see it in my inbox all day, every day. People are lonely and they're disconnected, and I see the correlation. I can't deny that I think a lot of it is because of the uprise of social media and because of like the standards that my generation has set for what like success looks like, you know, like it's easy for me to talk about it from the spot of a verified check mark or whatever. But like at the same time, it's like, no, this can't be it. Like this won't fill you. Like it won't. I often think that God allowed me to do this TED Talk and have this crazy amount of success at such a young age, only to show me it's not here. Try and go tell the others that this isn't it. Because for me, this work means nothing if I am not investing in my craft, if I'm not actually doing something. And for me, my craft is writing. And I think that's why I show up every day, is because I love nothing more than those writing hours. Those are sacred to me, and they're unplugged and the world is never going to see them. But I think my generation has a problem with doing things behind the scenes. Like
that everything is for public recognition. Everything is like, not to play into stereotypes, but for likes or growth or platform or image or wow.
For commentary. And it's like, that terrifies me, because I just want to say, no. Like the magic is in cooking the dinner unplugged, pulling out a cookbook. The magic is in writing the book, not actually publishing the book and putting it out there in the world. Cause like right now I'm in a, doing a bunch of podcast interviews. And I think I just want to go back in my writing hole. That's what I love. Like, I love that creation process. And I think that if more people showed up to try to figure out what is it that you love to create, what is the life that you want to build in real life apart from the screen, I think they would feel a lot more significance. I think there would be less isolation and loneliness, because it seeps into all of these conversations with young people. Like I remember I was sitting one day, like before a speaking engagement, and they were all on their phones talking about their ratios. And I was like, what is a ratio? And a ratio apparently is the number of people that are following you compared to the number of people that you are following. And so your ratio is supposed to be significantly smaller than, or like the people you're following has to be a really small number in order to make like you look really important,
And that way
or
you're
something
a big deal,
like that.
right?
Yes. And I literally like stopped the conversation and was like, we're not actually talking about this right now. Like, are we really talking about this with like human lives? Like, are you literally just saying, I've just got to go unfollow some people so that I look better? Because I think that's what we're missing, all of us right now, is that like every single person that follows you is a human being who has insecurities, worries, fears, doubts, and we treat them like they're a number at the end of the day. And we wonder why we feel so lonely and isolated and depressed. Like, I don't know. I just get fired up about it.
I agree with you. That is resonating very deeply. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, though, and this is probably a case of feeding the monster or at least trying to play with the monster, is you built a very successful platform in your 20s and into your very young 30s. What have been some of the keys to that for you? Because you get to do what you are passionate about, which a lot of people listening would be like, I would love to be able to do that, whether it's writing or whatever they're doing. So what have been some keys to that for you?
I think I've tried over the years to always make the platform that I have be about the person on the other side of it. Like, I do not need it or want it to be about me. And so I try to show up every day and think, what does somebody else need to hear? What do they need to know? I live by this life of like serving. If I have an audience, I want to serve them. Like, I don't need them to stroke my ego. I don't need them to tell me I'm wonderful. I'd rather them not, because I don't get my significance from the internet. I used to, for sure. When I was first starting out, like all of this was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, people like me. And I felt like kind of like a unicorn within my community, but I fell off that pedestal real fast and real quick. And I realized like, no. Like, I need to fuel myself. I need to know where my real worth comes from. And then I need to create out of that place. And so for me, it's like I do a lot of really focused work that is like unplugged and very much about the creation process. Because if I say I want to be a writer at the end of the day, then I better be writing more than I'm doing anything else. I better be writing a lot more than I'm on social media. I better be writing a lot more than I'm learning whatever new marketing tool is out there. And it's crazy because I find this a lot in especially like the Christian author speaker world. If I can just go there.
You can go there.
We say we want these platforms because we want to preach or we want to write. And yet this is like this one space where you can say these things and yet never sit your butt in the chair and create anything at all. If you want to be Michael Phelps, you better get in the pool every single day. And yet in this industry, it's like, I want to preach, but I don't open my Bible. Like, I would say if you want to preach, get your Bible right now and like go log some hours right over there, because like that's the most dangerous thing is if I'm getting up on stage and I'm just giving people more of myself. The world doesn't need that right now in this space. And so I don't know, like I would tell people,
it is bizarre because you kind of become the brand, right? And what do you do all day? It's like, well, I'm just me and people watch me. And it's like, well, where's the substance? How did you said early on, you kind of got caught up in the whole follower and growth thing. And then you kind of snapped back to reality or fell out of love with that. How did that happen?
I fell into a very deep, dark depression and I nearly lost my life to it. I was hospitalized. I never had a plan for how I would take my life, but I understood. I got it. I knew why people just wanted the pain to stop. And that to me was such a wake-up call because right before it happened, before there was like a switch that went off in my brain and I went from like high functioning to like not even able to perform the most basic of tasks. I remember having this moment where I could see the warning signs, but I just blew right past them. And one of them was I was speaking at a conference in Indianapolis, and there were 3,000, I think, like Sigma Tau Delta sorority sisters in the room. And I remember I spoke and they all immediately stood to their feet and gave me a standing ovation. And I got back to my hotel room and I remember having this really lonely moment of thinking, who do I tell? Who do I even have in my life to tell about this? Because I'm not really, it wasn't that I wasn't invested in people's lives, but it felt very empty. It was a really cool experience, but I didn't have anything real to come back to. So that was the only experience that I could get value from. And shortly after that, everything was all systems down. And I was living in Atlanta, but I hadn't planted any roots in Atlanta. And so I had to fly back to Connecticut, where I was from, because that's where people actually knew me. They knew me before any of this success had happened. And those are the people that showed up and they walked with me and they got me through this thing. But that was where God just used that time to show me hey, this little, this brand, this platform, all of it could be gone tomorrow, but also I didn't want to share a single one of those experiences with people on the screen because they weren't going to show up for me at 2 a.m. Those were not the people that were holding me through the night and were taking me to doctor's appointments. And so when I had to rebuild my life, I had to rebuild it on something other than this flimsy platform, and that's where I started a workout group with my girlfriends in the neighborhood. That's where I learned how to cook. I followed through with a Whole30. I decided to go on real dates. I built a life brick by brick based on real life experiences. And I was surprised to find that was so much more filling than anything that was happening online.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things I talk about with young leaders, and we danced on it briefly, is I get the question a lot as a guy in my 50s. People ask me, how do I build a platform? What were you doing to build a platform when you were in your 20s or 30s? And I'm like, I didn't even know what that word meant. Maybe, it's something you built out of wood for someone to stand on. I don't really know. And I said, I was just doing the work. I was trying to finish school. I was trying to start a church, plant a church, reach people. That's what I was doing. I was being a husband and a dad and not always doing a great job. And then that's just kind of emerged out of that. What would you say, a lot of leaders, and I want to hear it from your perspective at your stage of life, a lot of people seem to feel like they need a platform right now. That is a price of admission. Any advice on that?
Well, especially being in the book publishing space where it's that is the price of admission. It's having some sort of platform. Mm-hmm. And I would probably tell you hey, you can build a platform in a way that doesn't feel icky or weird or you're cold calling people in their DMs. I would, I'd figure out what it is that you need to share with the world. What are your messages? How can you serve the people? Because when you gain followers, how are you going to turn it back on them? Anytime that I'm showing up online, I'm trying to think, what do my readers need? What are the topics that they're into? And you don't need 5,000 people in order to start doing that, in order to start asking your audience, what do you want to see? What do you need? I actually have on my email list, when they sign up for, I have this thing called the Monday Club. And that's because I was tired of demonizing Mondays and I wanted to empower people for the week ahead. And when they sign up, I ask them if they'll fill out a quick survey. And it's a reader survey where they can say, this is the content I need right now. This is the question I'm trying to answer in my own life. This is where I'm at in life. And I'm able to use that in order to figure out what are the things that I should be writing that are going to encourage somebody. And so it's if you've got 5 people following you, I would tell you start right there and engage with those people. And even though it's happening on a screen, don't take the humanity out of the process, you know? Like, it's like I'm having conversations every day with people in my DMs and in my inbox. And like, I don't get to reach all the people, but like, if I've got you in front of me, like, best believe I'm not going to act like I'm too important to engage with you, because to me, I see that a lot in the platforms. And I see a lot of people that are like, quote unquote, like Christians that are like, you meet them in real life and they don't even give you the time of day. They don't want to have a conversation with you. And that scares me, you know? And so I think like, I don't know, I've always like gone by like lessons that my mom has taught me of like, you always show up and you try to be more interested than you are interesting. And that will get you really far if you can just flip it onto other people, especially if you're an introvert. It works really well because then it's like, I don't have to worry about the attention being on me. I can ask them questions about their life. But yeah, I think if you keep it through the posture of like serving people, like you're going to get so much more fulfillment out of that. And then, like I've said over and over again, like invest in that behind the scenes work. And like, I am somebody who believes that like books should be written because we still have a great need for really great words. And so if you have a very small platform, just get dedicated with it. And like, you don't need to know all the marketing schemes. That's not what I'm telling you to do. But like little by little, just invest in that space, invest in growing and learning and developing and like making that a space, like whether that's a blog space or an Instagram or a podcast where like people come and they actually get something from it. They actually walk away feeling better or changed because of it. Because if it's all about you at the end of the day, like it's exhausting for you. And eventually people will just say, I don't like this anymore. And they'll, you know.
That's such sound advice. I hope people are taking notes. And I think you bring a lot of wisdom to that conversation, Hannah. In your book, you give some advice that's interesting. You started off by saying our world is consumed with perfection. I'd love you to unpack that a little bit. How are we consumed with perfection? And then you make a case for consistency. Can you talk about that?
Gosh, I'm like a discipline junkie. Like I'm very much like an advocate for like show up and then show up again and then keep showing up.
Yeah.
But I think honestly, that's just the culture that we've been handed is a culture of perfection. And even though we say we want the messy and the unedited and the unfiltered, we actually still do want perfection. And like, that's something that I think you can like untrain yourself from. Like, I think that like, I mean, I look at my blog and I think, well, that blog is nowhere near perfect because to me, that's practice. Like I show up on that blog to practice my craft every single week. And so if we can just look at like creating things as much as we can, not for the need for it to be perfect, but the need for it to get the message across, whatever the message is, like, I think we'd put a lot more things out there that could actually help the world. But when it comes to like consistency, like when I went through that depression, like that's what I came out on the other side needing to do. Like I needed to become consistent. I needed to be the person that didn't just show up once, but kept coming back. And that looks different in a lot of areas of my life. But it's the same thing like we were talking about of like, okay, like if I want to be a person who is healthy and feels fit, I can't go to the gym once and expect overnight results. Like, if I have like a New Year's resolution, like that's going to require some consistency on my part. Like not just showing up once, but showing up again and again and again. And I think a lot of times people stop showing up because they're not seeing results. Yes. They might not know how close to the breakthrough they actually are. But everything in my life operates off of consistency. And I want that in my work, but I also want that with my people. I want to be known as someone who was consistent, if not anything else. And I don't think I'm perfect at that. I'm always feeling like I'm getting another crash course in it. But I don't know. Like, I
It's almost
think
like
there's so much
falling in love with the process of writing rather than just the results of writing, the process of posting rather than the results of posting. Because I don't know that you find this or not. I find it very difficult to predict success. What takes off, what doesn't take off.
Yep. The things you write and you're like, this is going to be amazing. And then it's like crickets, right?
Yep.
And I guess I must be in a healthy space right now because like I rarely even go back to see how a post did. But I do try to be consistent with setting a 15-minute timer and going through comments and responding to comments. Even if it's a week later or 2 weeks later, I am still trying to get back to people because I think that they deserve that response.
We do our best too. It's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard to keep up sometimes. Yeah, it really is. What is slow magic?
That is what we've been talking about. It is that idea of like, not like unplugging the phone and just investing in your craft. Like, I want to get to the end of my life and be a really great writer. That means I have to write a lot of words. And so it's exactly what it is. It's like, it's so hard to describe.
No,
like,
I love it. I love it. I love that phrase.
Magic.
I didn't know whether there's anything else on that, but I've found that really helpful. Let's talk about plateaus because we all hit plateaus and you got a whole section in your book about plateaus. What do you recommend if a leader finds him or herself there?
I think that a plateau is like not an invitation to give up. And I think a lot of times like that's what we use it as. And so if you are experiencing a plateau, I think you have to be willing to backtrack a little and maybe look at something from a different angle. I went through a plateau with more love letters several years ago where I really fell out of love with the work that I was doing. And I felt like because the magic wasn't there, like if I just ignore this thing, then it's going to go away. Well, that didn't help anything at all. And so in reality, I had to recommit myself and like recommission myself to the work of right here, to the daily tasks, to going into the weeds and look at like, okay, what's not working? What could we change? Could we fine tune? And through that, I learned that it's not that I had fallen out of love because I had never fallen in love to begin with. I had stepped into it. And so if there's a plateau, I would still say you have to keep taking those intentional steps. And like, for me, like I keep a notebook where I just kind of like log everything that I do and everything that needs to be done. And I do it all analog just because I think there's power in writing things down. But I'm able to go back and see evidence of times where I felt like things weren't moving. And instead of stopping, I just said, okay, how can we go in and fine tune this process, especially because I think like as leaders, like our years ebb and flow, right? Like, so like there might be a really busy time and then there might be a time where you feel like I don't have a lot going on at all. And that's not like an invitation to shut off or to not do anything, but to maybe go back and look at the systems that you've built and fine tune those, because when another surge happens, as it probably will, you're going to wish that you had fine tuned those systems so that like the machine could run in a sense, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Because again, and I wonder if that's somehow tied to the results versus the process, right? Like you're right. It's a long obedience in the same direction. Eugene Peterson, Nietzsche. Yeah.
We're doing an Advent series right now. And I wrote the whole series last year and now it's like releasing, but it's still been a process of like going back and saying, okay, like what worked last year? What didn't work last year? What could we fine tune? What could we rewrite? And it's like every time you're putting something out there, making it new and making it like, I don't know, like approaching everything with excellence, I think is incredibly important. And I try to like leave that as the foundation for the things that I create, is that it's like, I'm not just going to throw something together. I want it to be excellent from start to finish. And so how do we show up to our crafts with excellence?
I want to ask you this one more question. So you are connected to a lot of young leaders. When you think about the next few years, what do you think some of the greatest needs are among young leaders that a lot of us are trying to help, a lot of us are trying to reach? What would you say, hey, guys, pay attention to this?
Such a good question. I mean, I feel like there's still, and I could be wrong about this, but I think about it from my own perspective of like what I need. It's like, I think people are craving substance, like real substance, not easy clickable things. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with TikTok because it's definitely having a moment, but like at the end of the day, like people still crave substance and people who are the real deal. And so I think one, it's committing yourself to actually being the real deal, to walk your walk before you ever talk about it. Because we see this a lot, especially like in this world of Christian leaders, is that it's like they're really great at preaching, but then like their life behind the scenes like just doesn't match up. And so it's like, be committed to the walk before you decide you're going to get out there and talk about it.
What goes through your mind when you see a role model or a leader that you admire fall? Like what happens, or when you find out that, because you've been a lot of backstages too, that it's like, oh, wow, there's a huge gap between what happens when the mic's on and what happens when the mic's off. Like what does that do to you?
I mean, it makes me sad. Like I know people are human, and I know that like you can't necessarily know all the steps a person took or the experiences that they had to get to this place of like maybe like shutting down. We don't know a person's backstory. But I think too, to me, it's just fuel of like somebody might encounter me in the same arena one day. And so I want to try to be as real as I can be. And I don't know, like it makes you sad though, because I think like, especially within this industry, this is an industry where you would hope that people were being genuine and living out the principles that they're giving everybody. And so I'm not called to like judge anybody, but at the end of the day, like I know I'm going to keep going back to God to say, okay, like let's make this real, because if it's not real behind the scenes, then I have no business even having a platform. Like I don't want to give somebody something that I'm not doing myself. And like, I think that like, this is like a small, silly example, but like, I remember like for the longest time wanted, I got these like vitamins in the mail. They're like these little packs of vitamins that you take. And we all know the benefits of vitamins, right? Like doctors are always like, you should take vitamins. The reality is vitamins, like it takes 30 to 45 days for you to actually even feel the effects of these vitamins. But like, these vitamins, like this company, like they just did everything right. They prepackaged the vitamins. Your name was on the vitamin pack. It was really great branding. And I was like an evangelist for these vitamins. And what ended up happening though, is that I missed a day, and then I missed another day, and then I missed a week. And then I stopped taking these vitamins altogether. And like they piled up in my kitchen cabinet. I remember my husband would be like, you want to start taking vitamins today? Like, you have all these vitamins. But it was like I had been telling people about these amazing vitamins and I wasn't even taking them myself. And that's like such a small example, but like the crazy thing is that we do this on a much bigger scale, right? Like we're preaching all these things and we're not actually living it out. And so like, I think that's on every individual to say, okay, like I'm going to make sure that like my walk is real, that I'm not just talking a big talk, but like I'm showing up consistently to do these things that I say change things for other people.
Wow. Hannah, this has been rich and riveting. Anything else you want to share?
I don't know. I mean, you've asked really great questions and I've gotten pretty passionate. So.
Well, tell us about the book, obviously wherever books are sold, and then where people can find you.
Yeah. So the book is called Fighting Forward. And it is sold, wherever books are, shop local, support indie. And then I'm over at hannahbrencher.com. I am showing up there, writing consistently, hoping to encourage people. hannahbrencher.com.
Hannah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNiewhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNiewhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.